Thank you to all of our panelists for some really important models to look at that I think we all can learn from, and for sharing as well some of the lessons that you've absorbed along the way, some of the challenges as you look through to the future, and some of the resources and tools that are available for others who want to join this journey or further advance on their own journey. I'm going to ask one question before I open it up to the group for their comments, for their questions. And the first is, you know, we've been talking the last couple of days about things like fostering a culture of health and where there have been bottlenecks within a company or within, you know, different sectors to really take up the issues of health in a most meaningful way to leverage all of the assets that all of us can bring to bear, and to do that in partnership. And this issue that you brought up, Kate, of trust as well. And Allison spoke to behavior change issues and how challenging they can be. So as we look within corporate strategies of creating a culture of the SDGs, about the role that all of us can play, if we were to take up David's charge of this is our responsibility, all of us together, how do we create that culture of SDGs within a company? What are strategies that have worked and what haven't? And maybe as a subset of that culture of partnerships are the way to deliver on it. Is a question that I want to ask, and specifically from the lens of geography. I'm struck by Nand's presentation about, you know, and others that you've focused on, Allison, and otherwise, about how obvious these links are, how obvious these issues are, depending on your geography, depending on the vantage point that you come from. How can we use that geography as a powerful and persuasive tool to make the case at all levels within a company to create a culture of SDGs and a culture of partnership within that? So curious for panelists' thoughts on that issue.
Hello? Okay, that works. No, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, at least it sounds like a two-pronged question. One is, you know, how do you facilitate this change or this behavior change within the organization? And then how do you do that from that kind of geographical lens? And I have to say, from our perspective, you know, we started off with the concept and shared internally the idea of spearheading a coalition together for safer roads, which now is owned across, you know, 15 other companies. We just had the privilege to kind of get it going. And I think it was important for us to showcase internally, you know, a case example of where we could kind of get a seat at the table and be a part of something with other actors that could actually make a difference. And once we started to evidence the kind of impact and partnerships that were possible, it became easier for us to internally position something like our global smart drinking goals, which is much more ambitious in the sense of it being an independent company initiative, it being a 10-year commitment, and of course, you know, the large financial commitment at stake. The other important element of that was bringing the outside perspective in to our company. And so, you know, we have a global advisory council that meets a few times a year of folks, you know, across the health space, but of course marketing, as well as other kinds of thought leaders in the world who meet with one of our board of directors and our CEO to talk about how does the world think about us? What is something like Together for Safer Roads or the Global Smart Drinking Goals going to what's the value add of being kind of a global corporate citizen? And so, you know, there's the internal champions that are critical to making this a possibility, and we had to find those too. But finding those thought leaders to tell some of the most senior leadership and executive leadership in our company the same, you know, kind of perspective, and to validate that was critical to moving these kinds of initiatives forward. From the geographic perspective, you know, one of the reasons that we wanted to make this local is because obviously these challenges, like you said, are so contextual. But ultimately, if we want to facilitate or be a change agent and find change management within our organization, we need to identify that across functions in our company, so across marketing and sales and supply most critically, but also in our local operating companies, because that's where the businesses operate. So by making our initiatives local, we ultimately get to decentralize the ownership of these activities. So I think that's how we've been able to do it over the last 3 years.
Sorry, not to sit on top of you since we're so close. I think one of the challenges that a lot of us face is sort of this, the global perspective and then the very local. And this happens both in business strategies, where there's a pendulum between how much does the global headquarters, for lack of a better word, dictate or drive some of the strategies, and then how much of the local input and context comes back in and gets incorporated to that. And I think because we've been involved in some of the examples that I mentioned, some of these partnerships and these initiatives surrounding health for so long, we see the ones that are most successful where they're a bit immune to that pendulum swing. So sometimes it takes a champion, sometimes it takes a little bit of insulation from the sort of rhythms of the business to be able to do that. So one of the things that is very important, as Allison already mentioned and I echo, is the champions who not only champion the cause, but champion the expertise in building trust and the relationships. So some of our most successful examples have had the same people involved, maybe not always leading, but certainly counseling or advising some of these partnerships for a very long period of time, because it takes a long time to build that trust. And while you want to have your senior leadership, engaged and supportive, they may not always be able to be deeply immersed in some of these initiatives, but you certainly need their support, board support, and it's really, I think the literature has evolved with, KPMG and FSG and some of the other groups and some of the organizations who've really done this well with multiple partners in multiple industries, thinking about some of the implementers who are here represented in the room. It's really finding the case to make it clear that this is not just doing good, but it's the future longevity of, in our case, our companies to be able to operate, to be able to, grow our business. We heard about economic development and the impact that health has on that. It's also, the future success of these organizations, and whether we're 180 years old or, far less, even the earliest startups, it's always looking to a better social and environmental condition for the world to help us, succeed and have everyone prosper. So finding your champions, having that support, but also ensuring you've got experts within the organization who can build those relationships and drive these things forward, because they are not easy and they all have learning curves along the way.
Yeah, just throw in again the power of the next generation, the people that all of our businesses are going to employ. I think what's happened at KPMG in the last year or so is almost the pressure from the outside pushed our leadership to the recognition that we needed to frame what we do with a purpose. And so we went through one of these, I don't know if it's really a top-down strategy that said what we're doing, again, back to the really technical nitty-gritty that I was talking about before, that even if you're doing a tax return, it's on behalf of a charity who's working all over the world to address maternal health. Or you're working for a large corporation and keeping them out of trouble and fighting corruption and keeping them honest, that's going to have ripple effects into the community. So we had this large push for everyone to tell their story. If they were working for the City of New York's police department, or they're working in Johannesburg with a corporate organization, it had an incredible impact. The head of our human resources wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about this, and you wouldn't think you could get a tax and accounting firm jazzed about these issues, but it really has turned on a light. And I think back to Allison and Allison's point, this is now a new era of business. So I mean, we're inundated with books and articles about this. There is no longer space as a business to not be attentive to all of the issues that we've discussed today. So I think, and even just a last point, we keep talking about this transference of wealth from the baby boomers to the next generation, who will be investing a lot of money in future financial models and businesses and other, and they're almost saying, why are you asking me about this social impact piece? Like, of course, I'm going to be worried about not only the financial return, but the social impact of what I do. So I think the next generation's already switched on socially, and that makes it incumbent upon a CEO who wants to be around or have the business around in 10 to 15 years to also be thinking in these terms.
Great. I want to keep that.
I'll leave it up for you.
Want to open it up for discussion, for thoughts, for questions from those in the audience. Yeah, Lou. And again, let's use name and organizational affiliation.
Thank you. Lou Valdez, U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And I'll start by thanking our panelists for your innovative examples of what your companies are doing in support of the SDGs. 2 points, 1 point and 1 question. I would like to hear your thoughts, because regardless of the good business, making the case for making the business case, just by the mere fact that you all are doing this will make your results will make it suspect in the global public health community. And I'm interested in hearing about, Allison, you talked a little bit about it, that need for very transparent and measured, both the measurements of impact and outcome, and the assessment of did you truly add value or not, and how did you do so? Not just internally into your company, which I think is the easier, it may not be easier for you, but from our point it would be easier, but to make the case for the global community. And so a little bit of how you were thinking. And then Kate mentioned, which kind of struck me because of what David said earlier, Kate, you mentioned that in the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, business was at the table at the onset, which is a good thing, but it obviously did not translate into the May World Health Assembly on the whole non-state actor thing. And I'm struck by this continuing gap and lack of comfort. And David was right. It is not because of civil society as much as that banner was being led by member governments. And Nand, your effort that brings in the ministry to be sure that, and a multilateral, to be sure that buy-in was there at the onset, I think is particularly important. So I just raised these points and would like to hear some of your thoughts about some of those. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I'll focus on the first part of it. I didn't have enough time to go in much depth, but as you saw in terms of the architecture that we're working to develop around our global smart drinking goals, I mean, one of the reasons that, it looks complex, but we're advancing it in a very thoughtful way is because we want to make sure that the perception of our initiative can withstand the scrutiny of what we're trying to achieve, because we are very serious about making a significant commitment to achieving these goals. And so, I can't show it again, but I'm happy to discuss it. That's both from an oversight perspective, so we have this technical advisory group that's already convened twice, and will, again, like I mentioned, announce later this year who's part of it, who is independently advising, kind of us on their recommendations of who we should be partnering with. And so we have RFPs out for a range of activities around implementation, and as well as monitoring and evaluation. And they're the ones that are responsible, as part of that proposal review process, to do a technical review, scrutinize it, and give us their feedback on what we should support given specific time and budgetary parameters. And so I think that that's a very important part of how we're hoping to achieve this. The second is on the monitoring and evaluation front. Our intention is to support an institution who can advance the strongest science-based approach to monitoring and evaluating our progress over time, but also realizing that a lot of the work that we're going to be doing does require a little bit of adaptability, because some of the interventions that we're going to be tested, like even screening brief intervention, have never been tested at scale like this before. There's an evidence base here, but there isn't necessarily an evidence base at the scale that we're talking about, as well as testing some of the innovations that are showing promise in the field, but don't have the evidence yet behind it as being effective. So, we're working to strike that balance, but again, whoever's leading that work will be independent, and they'll be independent in terms of how they structure the approach. And the intention is that we have an initial monitoring and evaluation framework that we have internally, and that will obviously set the groundwork for how they develop the methodology and approach for measuring our progress over the next 10 years.
Great, thanks, Allison. I wonder if someone wants to hit on the issue of skepticism and confidence of private sector involvement. Nand? I'm not sure that one's alive, Mike. You might.
Thank you.
Okay.
Getting you obviously want the government on board. They have the largest armies of health workers in the world. So to do anything without the government is a waste of time. I mean, it'll only be a pilot, you'll only run it, and it's a waste of time. So you want your government on board, number one. When you have the government, the huge advantage is that you reach every single village. India has 690,000 villages. How could you ever get there otherwise? So you plug into a network that works, that is there, that's existing, number one. Number two, that has restraints, and you have conditions, like you cannot then bring on a partner that would be in conflict of interest with the government. You couldn't bring on a baby milk power company, for example, if you're promoting breastfeeding. Like, you couldn't do that. So you have to make sure that your corporate partnerships are in line with the government and that there's no conflict there. That becomes very, very, very important. Otherwise, you have videos produced, say, for example, with the logo at the bottom that cannot be supported in any way. And those are and strangely enough, those are the ones that want you to promote, that are willing to give you the money because they couldn't get it otherwise. It's always that way, it's difficult getting money, but it's very easy to get money from people who shouldn't be giving money, really. So that's just the way it is. So we find that the governments it's challenging working with governments because they change. Relationships are established, and then we started the video you just saw. We had working with the first government. They approved the program, they approved the videos, and then a new government came in and they said, those are not our videos, and we don't, our thinking is different, and we have to change everything. Funding is on with one government, then is not necessarily with the other government. With UN organizations, the same, their systems are changing. The UN changes its internal system. So you start with one system, then they say our computer system is changing, then our MOU methodology is changing, then our all of that is within the government, within the corporations and so forth. It's easy. I mean, we know how to get stuff done. Governments don't. And many UN organizations in third world countries don't. So those are the challenges I find.
A good provocative answer, thank you, Nand.
Would you expect anything else from me?
No, not at all. Do you have a burning thought? I want to get to hopefully two other questions from the floor.
It was just about, in response to Mary Lou's question, I mean, it's not a yes or a no. In some corners, there's great camaraderie between a government and a business and civil society, and it's working and it's a smooth engine. In other contexts, there's still this animosity from the 1980s, and you can probably appreciate from all of us, all that does is perpetuate the status quo that gets us nowhere. So you have to do workarounds and get to a place. It's such an old argument, it just gets, frankly, exasperating. But the exciting piece of it, or the important piece, the goals have been announced. It was the big fanfare of September. This July is when a number of countries come back and report on how they've done after the first year. So now where we are is what we keep calling the implementation phase. Now all eyes go to all of the member states who signed the SDGs, 193 or 198. How are you doing? And that's going to require metrics and data and analytics. And that's really the ecosystem that's getting really excited right now. And I think it will help diminish some of that, the questioning around an alcohol company really doing good in this space. We'll have more tools. So I think we're moving into a fun place where maybe we can start to get a bit more scientific around how you quantify social impact. It's a little nebulous right now, but maybe when we convene in 5 years, someone will have really cracked that nut, and we can speak about it in more quantifiable terms.
Great. Regina. Oh, that's old. Yeah, sorry, I'm being pointed over towards, is it someone in the back? Oh, at the mic, of course. Hi, please.
Hi, I'm David Wofford. I'm with a small business, Meridian, that does USAID-funded projects in global supply chains of companies around the world. We have projects in Cambodia and Bangladesh and elsewhere. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to applaud the examples. It was really impressive. And I also want to frame my question and comment by saying I'm a big believer in partnerships and the business case for health. But I just want to say, to note that no one's mentioned goal number 8, which has to do with decent work. And this gets back to the question here, which is, in fact, you don't need WHO to say you can't do partnerships. Departments of labor are dealing with industry all the time. And in fact, millions and millions of poor workers are working in supply chains with very poor health on site. And this is a huge opportunity. And I would just urge this group to think about the policy, practice, operations, both individually in their supply chains, but corporately. Because the big action around CSR is about collective action and how you have multiple kinds of governance. So my question to you is, have you thought, not just in terms of these wonderful partnerships, which are great, but how operationally you're thinking about supply chains and how you're using your internal structures and your role in industry associations and policy work with governments to change the focus on health within occupational health and safety and other policy venues?
Great question. I don't know who wants to take it on.
I think that's a really good point. The goals actually collectively, externally give us a framework, but it's also a really valuable tool, I think, for companies, especially those of us with a pretty large footprint and complex supply chains, maybe when we support different industries, even within our own corporate structures, to use the goals to look internally at exactly what you've mentioned. And often, these things are handled by different groups, per se. Probably on the corporate side, less a brand side in our case, but it provides a good framework to really look internally as well as the collective impact we want to have externally, because certainly we all want to be sure that we're walking the walk and talking the talk at the same time. And I think different stakeholders drive that examination, but this is a framework that can be used across the company, across multiple functions, where people might look at one or two of the goals, but again, they're interconnected. And so I think it's going to help us, as you said, finding those champions across functions internally, especially when we're pretty diverse geographically as well as size and scale, to make sure that we're looking, just as you said, internally, to be sure that the things that we're looking to achieve, in perhaps a country where we don't have a footprint or a large presence, we're not forgetting that within our own house, so to speak. So it's a very good point.
Great. Any last question from the floor? No one wants to be that last person before lunch, except we have a volunteer here, so.
There you are.
Michael Smollins from .sub. I'm working with Nand. There are technologies and procedures that are getting more prevalent that one could ask the audience. In other words, each of your large multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies are framing what you want to do based on your own perspectives of what you think is important. But there's lots of people in each of these regions that might have different perspectives. So there are ways to start off and have people join the conversation So before you get in to start implementing programs, you have different perspectives from a local point of view. And there's lots of new technologies that are available so that you can have what people locally would like to have done from Procter & Gamble or from Anheuser-Busch InBev. And this might not be exactly what your senior executives were looking for, but it perhaps would greatly mitigate the confusion and the skepticism that is all coming from headquarters, that you're joining forces in a conversation in the beginning, so that when you construct what you're doing and implementing, you have a lot of input from the local needs of people. And I'd be glad to. There's a lot of those kinds of things that are readily available.
A great point. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. Allison?
I think that's a great point. And I think that how we've talked about it has been kind of from this global lens, top down. But in reality, from an implementation perspective, the ownership is incredibly local. So, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, as one example of the partnership we launched, we had a range of roundtable discussions with series of stakeholders, implementing organizations on the ground, innovators, potential university partners, as well as governmental partners, to explore under this broad framework or guideline to ensure kind of a quality standard of what this initiative can achieve. What does this look like for your city? What kind of assets do you have to bring to bear to define this in a way that makes sense for Johannesburg, as just one example. And the same is for Zacatecas. So, we're trying to find that middle ground to ensure that kind of kind of championing of not only our company local, but of those other actors, to ensure the sustainability of this initiative once we leave. Because as Nand said, we're supporting this in each of the cities for between 5 and 10 years, and ultimately we want this to serve as an example of best practice that they can use for other cities in their country, but also for other parts of the world. So, great point. And
just maybe to have one thought to tie some of these themes together, I think we're entering a new era of mutual accountability, where I think citizens and beneficiaries will hold stakeholders to account for progress that I think is claimed to be made, and data will drive a lot of that, and how people can give input as citizens into what gets done, what should get done, and if progress is really being seen, I think will be a hallmark of the SDG era. And technology, in part, will enable that in unprecedented ways. So, okay, thanks everyone for a really rich discussion. Great to have these insights from such a wonderful group of colleagues. We're going to break for lunch, reconvene at 1:30 for a discussion on different models for how business is engaging in the SDGs for health. So enjoy your lunch and join us back at 1:30.